If you're like many of the women that I've worked with over the decade of birth trauma support work that I've been doing, you may well have left your birth experience with a sense of failure, a narrative that says, my baby had to be rescued from my faulty body, with feelings of guilt or shame, self-doubt, perhaps a mixture of all of those, with some sort of belief that your body let you down, or you let yourself and your baby down in birth. Perhaps you felt that you weren't strong enough. Perhaps you felt you didn't advocate for yourself enough, that you should have spoken up more, that you made poor decisions, poor choices around your birth, that you should have said no to that intervention, you should have asked more questions before agreeing to something, that you should have chosen a different care provider or a different birthplace. But actually, yeah, it's not what you've been led to believe it is, or what you've come to the conclusions around why your birth went the way it did, being because of some fault of yours. And I want to try and help you to understand this today, right? Or at least have a beginning understanding of this. I'm going to do lots more of these videos, and I can't unpack everything in one video, so I won't be able to go into lots of depth around the various aspects of what I want to talk to today, but I will address them in future videos. Yeah, because there's lots of reasons why those feelings are misplaced when it comes to birth. First of all, I want to try and sort of categorize birth trauma into two main categories, right? So the first I call shitty bad luck births. These are when trauma occurs as a result of something that was just utterly bad luck, like we sometimes have in life. It wasn't as a result of poor care. It wasn't the result of that anything should have been done any differently. And it was just one of those things. The examples of shitty bad luck would be going into premature labour and your baby having to spend time in intensive care. Another example would be stillbirth or miscarriage. Another example might be a completely unanticipated postpartum hemorrhage. So these are the sorts of examples of where, everything was done right. You had good information. The choices made around your birth experience were spot on. You had great care and support, really respectful care, and yet you ended up with a traumatic birth. The other category is births where the trauma is seated in some sense of disempowerment around the birth experience. And this is usually the result of, it's the result of a number of things. I'm going to sort of talk about a lot of them, but one of the key ones is poor care, is having choices taken out of your hands, is feeling done to by people who you trusted had your best interests at heart and would treat you respectfully and gently and with compassion and care and kindness. But that disempowerment is also a result of things like the conditioning that we have grown up with around birth, that where there's this sort of groomed compliance when it comes to the birth space, when it comes to decisions around our pregnancy and birth care. And I'll talk more about that conditioning in a moment. It's also the result of the power dynamics that exist within the birth space, and this feeds back to that conditioning piece as well. It's about a system of maternity care that doesn't understand what an important and powerful rite of passage that the birth process is. It's not just an important rite of passage for the mum and the baby, the new family. It has long-term consequences. It imprints on the mother, on the baby. And this imprinting will impact future birth experiences. It will impact how we parent. It will impact our beliefs about ourselves and our capabilities and all sorts. So a system of maternity care that really doesn't get what women need in birth in order to be able to support their birthing physiology, right? To support the helpful hormones that get our babies born in safe, rewarding and efficient ways. Because actually that's what nature has designed birth to be for the huge majority of people. We're mammals, we're women. Of course we're designed to know how to birth our babies without the need for any outside interference. Yet the statistics, the 30% caesarean rates here in New Zealand, the third of women that are beginning their births with a medical induction of labour, the huge number of women that are having epidurals, that are having forceps or ventouse deliveries, that are having episiotomies, that are having their labour sped up with synthetic oxytocin. These statistics would suggest that our birthing bodies are untrustworthy, that we don't know how to birth without outside interference, not safely. It is simply not true. We are mammals. We are women. We are made for birth. And it's really quite nonsensical to think that those sorts of high intervention rates are done out of necessity in order to keep birth safe. Of course sometimes they are, but that should be a small fraction of the time that they are. Just that one example of caesarean is the World Health Organization says caesarean section rates shouldn't be, any caesarean section rates that are above 10 to 15% are no longer positively affecting rates of mortality or morbidity for mums and babies. So a 30% caesarean section rate, there's something going on there, right? Where women are having this major surgery and she's trying to recover from this major surgery at a time in her life when she is going to be more exhausted mentally, emotionally, and physically drained, and needing all of her self-belief, needing to be able to trust her instincts and her intuition, because she's got to parent this little newborn, something she's never done before in her life. And yeah, if she's beginning that process with a whole lot of self-doubt, with a belief that she failed in birth, with a lack of bond with her baby, which is a common consequence of a traumatic birth experience, struggles with breastfeeding, another common consequence of birth trauma, then wow, she's gonna have a really, really rough time. So yeah, we have an over-medicalized system of birth care that is not meeting the needs of a lot of birthing women, and is disregarding the importance of holistic care, where the woman remains the authority over her birth choices, and where her physiology is being supported as best it can. I mean, I don't believe that there are that many birth care workers, midwives, obstetricians, who truly understand how birthing physiology works and the way that many common interventions impact negatively that physiology. Because if they did understand it, and if positive birth outcomes were at the fore of birth care workers' minds, then we would see a lot more physiological births. Yeah. There's a lot of lip service paid to informed decision making and consent within the birth space as well, which, if women are not having their right to informed consent being respected when it comes to various interventions in pregnancy and in birth, then that's going to lead to a sense of disempowerment, right? If they haven't been given all the information in order to be able to make an informed choice, or to give or refuse consent, and then they end up feeling negative about their experience or having bad consequences as a result of the intervention that they agreed to, then that's gonna leave them feeling very disempowered. Yeah, if they are having procedures done to them in a way that doesn't utterly respect their rights, their autonomy, their sensitivity at this very vulnerable stage in their life, if it doesn't appreciate that a huge proportion of birthing women have experienced past sexual trauma, and that the many common interventions that occur in labour and birth would be incredibly triggering for many women who have a history of sexual assault. Yeah, you can see where this is going, right? So, and we hear this kind of lack of consent in a lot of the language that we hear used when people are describing their birth experience. We'll hear them say, I wasn't allowed to go more than 42 weeks, so I had to have an induction. My baby was breech, so I had to have a cesarean. I was pushing for too long, so they had to help me out with forceps or ventouse. My waters had been broken for too long, so they had to induce my labour, because otherwise I might have got an infection. So this I had to, or I wasn't allowed to. This language suggests that people don't realise that they had a right to choose their path. Just because their baby was breached doesn't mean they had to have a caesarean. Just because their body still hadn't gone into labour at 42 weeks doesn't mean they had to have an induction. Just because their waters have been broken for X amount of hours and labour hadn't progressed much doesn't mean things had to be sped up with synthetic oxytocin. So, yeah, when we think about the language people use, it suggests that this right to informed decision making and consent around their bodies and their birth experiences is not really, it's not being enacted, and it's not really being understood. Yeah, I think a lot of people know that this is their right. I think a lot of people have been told that they have the right to choose, to say yes or no to various interventions, but the reality, when they're in that birth environment where there are these power dynamics, where there's this groomed compliance, this conditioning that they've grown up with, means that their ability to get their needs met around informed decision making and consent goes out the door. Also, when we are in a state of trauma, our brains are they're in survival mode, right? They're focused on keeping us alive. And often when we're in a state of trauma, when we've kind of moved through fight or flight and we're in some sort of freeze or fawn state, our brain has shut down the neocortex part, the part that's responsible for rational thinking, for language, for asking questions, right? And so we can't give consent. We can't take on board information in order to be able to make a choice about whether we agree to that intervention or not. I'm not saying that because we are more in that state that birth, practitioners, maternity care practitioners shouldn't try their best to enable an informed consent process. But it's just another factor that plays into birth being a very disempowering experience for many people, and ultimately a traumatic experience for many people. So yeah, coming back to that conditioning piece, a lot of us grow up believing that authority figures know better than we do what's best for us and our bodies. Authority figures being anybody older than us often, but especially parents and doctors and priests, teachers, and that we're not to question that authority, that doing so is being disrespectful. We're also taught not to trust our body wisdom. We're taught not to listen to the messages our bodies are giving us. If we get a headache, we're not encouraged to question what message our body is trying to send us through giving us that headache. Like perhaps it's trying to tell us that we need to drink more. Perhaps it's trying to tell us that we are overdoing things and we need to rest. These are just a couple of examples. Instead, we will take something to numb that pain. We will take drugs to stop that headache. So and there are lots of ways from a young age that we are taught to tune out to what our body messages are. We have to sit still at school at an age when our bodies are wanting us to run around and be noisy and play and be adventurous. We are told we can't go to the toilet until lunch break, and so we have to hold on. We're told we have to eat all of the food in our lunchbox before we can go out to play, even if our bodies are full and we're not that hungry. These are just some ways that we are encouraged to not listen to what our bodies are asking of us. And to that same end, we are discouraged from listening to our intuition. That's often passed off as sort of woo-woo nonsense, really. We are taught to be people pleasers. We are taught to be good, compliant girls who do not rock the boat and who put others' needs before their own. Who are taught not to say no, not to be loud, not to be angry, not to be assertive. And this all feeds beautifully into being compliant patients, because pregnant women, birthing women are not sick, are groomed to be compliant patients in the birth space. Right? It serves that system of over-medicalised birth. So 2 key categories of traumatic birth: the shitty bad luck experiences, which I think a lot of people think was the cause of their birth trauma. It was shitty bad luck that my baby got stuck or got distressed and that I had to have an emergency cesarean. But actually, when we unpack the story and we discover that, your labour was induced, okay. You had to have an epidural because the contractions were too intense, okay. Then we build up a different picture, and we come to learn that actually it was the interventions that were done to try and mitigate some risk that actually ended up causing the birth to become, concerning, risky, unsafe. Synthetic oxytocin does increase the likelihood that you're going to need an epidural, that birth is going to be too painful without one. Synthetic oxytocin also increases the likelihood that your baby will become distressed. Being on your back with an epidural means your baby is more likely to get stuck in a poor position. These things are all going to lead to that need for that emergency cesarean, and that was not shitty bad luck. That was because of an intervention, often a needless intervention, that was done without your full informed consent. So shitty bad luck versus disempowerment as a result of essentially a shitty system of care. So coming back to those feelings of guilt, shame, self-doubt, a sense of failure that people have around their birth unfolding the way it did. You, like I said earlier, if you've been left thinking, I should have stood up for myself more, I should have said no, I should have asked more questions, I wasn't strong enough, I let myself down, I let my baby down, my body let me down, I failed to progress, I failed at birth. If you've been left with those feelings, like I said earlier, one of the things that goes out the door when we become really afraid in birth, when we begin to enter that freeze or sort of fawning state, and this is one of these things I'll flesh out more in a later video, we don't have access to that part of our brain that helps us to make in our decision making, that helps us to voice our concerns, that enables us to say no, to say stop, to say I want time to think about this, to ask questions. Right? Our bodies that failed to progress, they weren't failing us. Our bodies were doing what they needed to do to keep us and our babies safe. Again, this will be something I will talk about more in another video. But essentially, the nuts and bolts of it are that if you do not feel safe in birth, that your body will believe it is an unsafe environment in which to birth a helpless little newborn. So it will slow your progress. It will shut off those helpful hormones in place of the ones that are supporting you to fight off the danger or to flee from it, which you can't do in birth. So yeah, a lot of people are in some sort of a freeze, fawn, disassociated state when they're giving birth. If you are giving birth in that sort of a state, you also don't have access to the helpful hormones that will enable you to bond with your newborn, that will enable you to feel a sense of accomplishment and pride at the moment of birth, which is actually how we're designed to feel when we come out the other side of birth. There are so many reasons why it is a false narrative to believe that you were somehow at fault during your birth experience. So I want you to leave this session remembering three key points. One is, you made the best choices based on the support and information you had available to you at the time. Right? Whatever choices you made surrounding your birth experience, you made them believing that that was going to bring you the safest outcome. Of course you did. I mean, nobody wants a safe outcome for you and your baby in birth more so than you do. So whatever interventions you did or didn't have, wherever you chose to give birth, whoever you chose to have in your birth space, you made those calls believing that that was what was going to give you the safest outcome. And it's actually nonsensical to think otherwise. And yes, in hindsight, you might go, I wish I had made different choices. But you can only work with the information and support you have available to you at any one moment. So you made the best choices you could based on the support and information you had available to you. The second key point I want you to remember is that you can feel both grateful for your healthy baby or for various aspects of your birth experience, And simultaneously you can feel angry, frustrated, hurt, upset about the way your baby was born. They are not mutually exclusive things. We live in a culture that has this a bit of toxic positivity going on, and where we are encouraged just to focus on the positives. So when people try to share their traumatic birth experience with others, they are often met with, oh, just focus on your healthy baby, or, oh, it could have been worse though, it could have been worse, at least such and such. Oh, it wasn't as bad as these comparisons that go on, and this trying to remind you that it could have been worse. Just be grateful. But yeah, you can be both grateful for your healthy baby and really not okay with how your baby came into the world. You can be grateful that that doctor saved your baby's life by giving an emergency cesarean, and also be very aggrieved, angry, hurt, upset about the way they treated you in the birth space, the way they talked to you. All right, and the final key thing I want you to take away today is to know that if you are somebody who has been left with negative feelings surrounding your birth experience, that healing is available to you, and it doesn't actually matter how long ago your birth was. Healing is available. And I would encourage you to reach out to me or somebody else who works in birth trauma healing, who specialises in that. But yeah, there's lots of tools. I have a podcast, Healing Birth with Carla, which shares lots of stories of mothers who have gone from having had a traumatic birth to finding healing and having a really healing, positive and empowering next birth experience. So listening to some of those stories can be really inspirational. It can be really informative. You can get ideas about how you can access your own healing, how you can set yourself up for a positive next birth experience if you choose to have another baby. Healing is available to you. Your trauma is valid. It deserves to be heard. And you are worthy of healing.